Together with American Songwriter, we had the opportunity to talk to Brett of the Juliana Theory. Brett talked to us all about the entire journey of the Juliana Theory, really how he got into music, how the band started as a side project. He talked about all of the records they put out and signing to a major label, and just, it was an incredible, incredible conversation. Brett talks about how the Juliana Theory decided to reemerge from hiatus and bring us some new music for the first time in 15 years. So definitely check out their most recent release, Better Now. And it'd be rad if you check out our YouTube channel and Facebook page at Bringing It Backwards. We've got a ton of interviews, a bunch of videos up there. Also follow us on Instagram and Twitter. That'd be awesome, at Bringing Back Pod.
We'd appreciate your support if you follow and subscribe to our podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're Bringing It Backwards with the Juliana Theory. Thank you so much for doing this. First off, I want to know, you grew up in Pennsylvania?
Yes, sir.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the band is from an area outside of Pittsburgh, about 40 minutes outside of Pittsburgh, called Greensburg. It's kind of like Greensburg, Latrobe area. Mm-hmm. And it was a very, working class, hardworking sports town. Mm-hmm. And, it's cool because as sort of off the beaten path as it was, we had a very, very strong local music scene, an all ages kind of scene. So a lot of, pretty much everybody that had ever been in the band, kind of started out and playing in bands together when we were 14, 15, 16 years old. So mm-hmm. just kind of all around, playing in the Western PA area. So it was a cool place to be from, in the sense that it was small enough to where where you kind of know people and you sort of find your tribe, but mm-hmm. it's close enough to, it's close enough to New York, it's close enough to Philly, it's close enough to DC, it's close enough to Detroit, to Cleveland, and so it's a good place for a band that's starting out. Mm-hmm. Before we would tour, it was easy to do weekend shows that hit a lot of metropolitan areas, I guess.
You could get to other markets pretty easily to perform and stuff.
Definitely.
Very cool. Well, how'd you get into music? What was the first instrument you learned?
I got into music really young. My dad was in a gospel singing group when I was super young, and I would go to see him practice and stuff with the group, and I remember thinking that was really cool. And at the same time, my grandmother, actually, she just passed away 2 weeks ago, but she was, thank you, she was a wonderful woman, and she was a musician, and she basically gave me the family heirloom piano that was 120 years old or something. And so when I was really, so when I was pretty young, I was her first grandkid, and she gave me the piano and kind of encouraged me to take lessons. So I guess my first instrument is piano. I suck at all instruments equally. So
bad.
So I'll never it's funny. I've never really been good at playing anything, but I remember I never really wanted to do my lessons, but I would always want to kind of just tinker away and make my own things. Uh-huh. I'd be just play my own songs or my own little ideas from a really early age. That always sort of, I think, interested me more than actually mastering any instrument, or learning scales or any of the things that I remember I would have friends think about my buddy Scott from the band Zayo, who's he actually was his going forward in time, but when I left Zayo, he ended up coming and basically replacing me, and he's such an insanely good guitar player who can shred and do just things that I couldn't even dream of doing. And as a kid, I was always jealous of people like that. but at the same time, I never wanted to spend time to I guess master playing something really well. And I mean, I honestly do wish I had, but I was just always more interested in kind of just writing songs and coming up with
your own thing.
Yeah.
When did you start
Yes,
really writing songs and performing? Was that pretty early on or later in life?
I started writing songs very early. I remember, I have a pretty specific memory of in first grade, the teacher would take the whole class in the middle of the day to the bathroom. And so we would all stand in line. And I remember standing in line in first grade, and I wrote a song in my head while we were sitting there and standing there. And I asked the teacher, I was like, Miss Sargent, I wrote a song. Can I sing it to the class? And she's like, okay, Brett, you can sing your song. And I got up and I sang the song to the class. And I remember the kids clapped and I was like, oh, wow, cool. And so the next day I did it again, and I did it 3 days in a row. And on the fourth day I asked, and there's a different song each time. And the fourth day she's like, "Oh, I think it's enough, Brett." And so I guess
you want to make it a daily thing.
No, we can't. We encourage this kid, but we can't let it go too far.
Wow, what an ambition you had, though. I mean, in first grade to be like, you know what, I'm going to sing in front of all of my peers.
I don't think I had fear yet at that point, or stage fright or awkwardness. I'm probably more awkward now, but it's just, it wasn't in no way. That's the cool thing about that's the beauty of childhood, is just that we haven't been, hopefully, most of us haven't been as weighed down with neuroses of different types and whatever. And you just you don't even think about it. You don't think oh, I wonder if this is going to be lame if I do this, or I wonder if whatever. You just oh, I got a song idea. Can I? And so it's just so natural and just not, no thought behind it. Just something that just came naturally, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. Well, talk to me about, so when did the Juliana Theory formed? Were you guys all how did you meet the other guys in the band? Were they classmates of yours? Did you know them growing up?
Most of us go back pretty far. Original bass player Chad and I have been friends since, I don't know, since I was 5, 6 years old. Oh, wow. And we for the majority of most of us we're all from that same area, and a lot of us knew each other really young, but then some of the guys, I met Josh Fiedler in probably kind of near the end of high school. We had this amazing class, I call it class in quotation marks, in school, called Guitar Lab, which was essentially one period a day where a bunch of guys, a bunch of people, students, sat in a room together. I say guys because I do think at that point in time, I'm pretty sure it was almost all the guys in the class. But we just all there's one period a day where you basically sat in a room and everybody played guitar, and we sort of had a teacher who would kind of give us assignments barely, but for the most part, we were just got to play guitar for one period of the day. And so Josh and I sat next to each other and we became buddies. And at the same time, we kind of started working at a movie theater together. And they actually had to separate us at the movie theater because we had got into too much trouble. Yeah. And so it's Josh and Brett cannot, they cannot have shifts together. And so, yeah. So we were at that point in time, Chad and I were in a band with Josh Walters, who ended up becoming TJT's drummer around the Love era. and Josh Kosker and Josh Fiedler and Neil were in a pop punk band, and we would always it was like me and Chad's band was kind of like a early emo core, for lack of a better word, like screaming, singing, melodic, heavy, kind of DC influenced kind of thing. And and we would play shows with Josh and Josh's pop punk band, and we just kind of all became friends. And I think there was basically there was just this one point where we were like, hey, you know what would be fun? It'd be fun to start a side project where some of us play instruments that we don't in our main bands, and we do this like fun little side project. And the goal was, we just wanted to do a 3-song demo tape and play like 1 or 2 shows.
Wow.
And I had never been like a singer in a band. I was always like a guitar player who did some backing vocals maybe, but it just somehow it became, well, who's going to sing? And it just kind of fell on me. I'm not sure how. I didn't really set out to do that. And honestly, yeah, the goal was to do a demo tape. So how on earth we went from that to me talking to you 22 years later, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I guess it became a little more than a side project, but
it's not anymore. Not still the side project.
Yeah, crazy.
Well, was the band that you were in prior to the side project, was that your first band?
It basically was. Yeah, it was my, yeah, the more I think, yeah, it basically was my first band. Yeah.
And you guys would play shows, and was that a band that you would take outside of your hometown to play, or was that later with the Juliana Theory?
We went out a little bit, but it would never be too much. I don't think we ever went much further than like Maryland, Ohio, New Jersey. It was mostly like probably just tri-state area for the most part. We didn't really I didn't tour and see the country until I joined Zayo, which was like simultaneously the same time that TJT formed. So
okay,
yeah.
Well, yeah. So Zayo was all like linear time. I mean, you were in both bands kind of at the same time. You were saying?
I think I joined Zayo, and the Juliana Theory side project started up about a week from each other, if that, like the exact same time period.
Oh, wow. Well, what turned to make Juliana Theory not the side project anymore? Like, was it just the songs, or like, do you remember that switch?
Well, for me, there was a few things. One was, so I get asked to join Zayo, and I'm like, suddenly I'm the guitar player in a metal core band that has a following and tours and does pretty well. And that was a really eye-opening experience and really fun and a really great learning experience for me. It was the first time I got to make a full album in the studio, and the first time a label paid for something, at first real tours. And it was really creative and enjoyable, but at the same time, TJT's recording like demos and whatever, made like our first EP and stuff. But I felt pretty early on, I felt a little bit limited, like just the fact that I think when you're playing like really heavy music, there's such a set of rules. That song has to be heavy. It has to have a breakdown. It has to have a riff. It has to, and it just felt like, I felt like while I love that type of music, I wanted to be able to experiment more with, well, what if we want to use a piano? What if we want to do just a really chill acoustic thing? What if we want to have whatever, like just be able to.
Yeah, your hands are kind of tied with that band, because you're kind of like, you have to be in one lane.
Exactly. And so I think basically so the label that Zayo was on was Tooth and Nail, and the president of that label saw Juliana Theory playing a smaller show and was basically like, hey, I'll put out a record for you guys if you want. And honestly, I really didn't honestly know any other labels at the time. And so when it was basically like, we'll give you a deal, you can go, we'll pay for you to make a record. Mm-hmm. That's when, for me, it became like, that's when I remember we had a talk and we sat down and we like got together and we're like, all right, now's when we have to decide if we're going to do this. We need to make this the thing. Let's make it our focus. And that's when we kind of, a couple members that were in college were like, I'll put my college on hold and we're just going to start to tour. And yeah, so it just kind of came from so somebody wants to pay to make a record, then we need to get out on the road and we have to go play shows and we need to tour. And so it just kind of came. When Tooth and Nail approached you, were you doing any of the touring, or did they just kind of see you at some of the local shows because of Zao? We had played a little bit out. We had started playing outside of the area, and oddly enough, or a lot of times, Zao would let the Juliana Theory open shows if they weren't too far away from our hometown. So I would pull double duty, and I would I'll get up on stage and sing, and then have a costume change, which basically usually meant taking off a jacket or putting on a jacket. comb my hair and then move from the center of the stage to the left side of the stage or whatever, right. and then play. And so there was always this weird, there was always a kind of connection between the two bands, which if you became a fan of Juliana Theory later, you might be like, I have no idea why there's any synergy between these two bands. It made no sense sonically, right. But if you knew that early history, it made a lot of sense. And so I just think basically on the first Zao tour I did, I had made like maybe 50 copies of the first Juliana Theory demo tape, and I brought them on tour in order to like give to people that had like distros or had like somebody like said, I know this person at a label or like a band that I liked. And I just was like trying to give them out to like people who I thought might be into it or might be able to like help or whatever it was. And so it was just, yeah. So we were playing out a little bit and had been leaving, but we hadn't toured yet.
But to have, Tooth and Nail Records, they obviously saw something in you guys or they wouldn't have signed it. I mean, that's crazy to think nowadays, like a label would probably look and see, stream numbers and this, and you have to have a certain amount of, experience under your belt, but to have them kind of, well, you were in a band that was already signed to them, but for them to say, this is something that could really work also, and then put money behind it. That's pretty cool.
It is. And I think that to me, that speaks to a couple things. One, it speaks to an era that doesn't really exist anymore. And that is the era of, there used to be, there's that great Tom Petty song, The Last DJ. And it's like, there used to be an era where a disc jockey in a city could say, you know what, I love this song. It's like, I feel like there was a story with like Rush, and there was a DJ in Cleveland that was like,
yeah.
It's like, this song Working Man is going to work in Cleveland because it's going to relate. And they just decided to play it, and all these people react to it. Whereas now, you're right, there's so many more algorithms and so many more things. But it was like, that was still a time period where somebody would say, you know what? I believe in this. I'm going to take a chance on this. And so I think Zao was having like a groundswell of definite like moment at that point in time where you could tell that things were connecting. And so Brandon at Tooth and Nail's like, hey, people are really into this, and I like you, Brett, and I think if we can make a record cheap. And it was like, it was like $6,000. It was like, I'll give you $6,000 to make a record. So it's not like this gigantic investment of, let's see if you know, let's put a huge amount of money and see if it works. So fortunately it worked because I think it just was the right timing, and it worked because it was inexpensive. You know?
Wow. So it's $6,000 to do Understand This Is a Dream?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Where did you record the record? Did they fly you out to, were they in Seattle or LA or something originally, the label?
They were, yeah, they were in Seattle. So the story with that is also this is so much more Zayo synergy, but when Zayo made the record that I was on, which is called Where Blood and Fire Bring Rest, it was, I don't know, I think I'm 19 at the time, and it was like, oh, this is the first time I'm ever at a real recording studio. And so we flew down to, actually, we didn't fly. I lied. We drove. We drove to Little Rock, Arkansas, to this very unassuming, small, basically almost home studio that was in a converted garage. And we went there because there was a band that Zayo was friends with that was from Little Rock called Living Sacrifice. And they had made a record with this guy, Barry Pointer, and his assistant, Jason Magnuson, in their hometown. And we thought it sounded really great. So we're like, hey, their record sounds great. So why don't we go to Little Rock? So Zayo goes down, and we made a record that we were really proud of, and we thought it sounded great. And it was really my first true recording studio like experience that wasn't just go for a week or go for a weekend and like do one song or two songs. And so while we were there, I was just like, hey man, these guys are great. These guys are really cool. And they're not really like, technically their specialty is not heavy music at all. They're like, you know, you go to the studio and it's lots of pictures of the Beatles up on the wall. And it's like, you could tell they're like, you know, it's like, I was like, I just have a really good feeling about these guys. And we just got along really great, and they had such positive energy and were so encouraging that I was like, I remember that basically what Tooth and Nail was like, you have $6,000 and you can make the record. We was like, we want you to make the record with Jay Robbins. And Jay Robbins was like, you know, the front man for Jawbox, who massive fan of. Like, one of the first shows I ever traveled to see was Jawbox. Oh, and wow. We were like, we loved Burning Airlines, we loved Jawbox. And so I was like, oh my God, it would be amazing to record with Jay Robbins. But the story was, you can have 6 days with Jay Robbins, or you can have 10 days with Barry and Jason. And I was like, honestly, Barry and Jason were so cool. I loved working with them. And we're such a young band, don't know what we're doing. The difference of 4 days, I think, could be a really big difference. And so we just chose to go to Little Rock. And so we just borrowed parents' minivans or whatever, and like just went and stayed in the worst hotel you could, like crack hotel. Like, it was awful, and just like tried to be as cheap as possible. And then did the record there. And
wow,
that's why it happened.
Yeah, for $6,000, and then you guys end up selling like what, 150,000 copies of it pretty quickly on. I mean, it's weird. Like it was fun. It was a really fun experience because we felt like no pressure. You know what I mean? Like, there was no expectation. Nobody knows who we are, and we don't. So you just go in and you're just trying to do the coolest thing you can and just trying to make something good. And yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can remember the first time I heard The Closest Thing. My buddy was like one of the earlier adopters to like internet finding like artists and stuff. I don't know where he would find bands, and like I remember he found like he went to Coachella in 2002 to see the Killers, and they were like the first band on the bill. Like, so he like was always like into artists before they did anything. And he showed me The Closest Thing, and he's like, dude, this is such a great song. And I heard it and I was like, oh my gosh. And that's the first time I was like hooked on your band, and it was all through
crazy.
The internet. Yeah. It was, I mean, probably 2000 or 2001 maybe. Yeah. And then, it was just life-changing for me. And that's kind of what started my journey in the, like, more of the emo bands, starting to find other bands like that was all through.
Wow. That's crazy.
Understand This Is a Dream. It was crazy. Well, okay. So from there, that does Tooth and Nail put you on the road to push the record?
I mean, I don't know per se if they put us on the road. Like, I know, like, as soon as we decided that, like, as soon as we said we were going to sign, we decided on our own that we were going to, like, that we were going to tour. And so I'm sure we just told them, yeah, we're going to hit the road. And in our first US tour we had no agent, and I booked the entire tour myself based on collecting information and numbers and names on Zayo Tour. And I just like, oh, hey, we played this cool place in Stockton, California, or we played this cool place in Memphis, Tennessee, or whatever. And I just, like, I don't know how I did it, but I just figured out how to book a tour, and we just went and did our first. We ended up doing, like, just did our first U.S. tour ourselves, and then right after that, we got offered to open for Elliott, and then we got offered a tour to open for Sensefield, and so that just kind of started it. And so, yeah, like, Tooth and Nail helped us buy a van, which was pretty much at that point was like all we really needed. You know, there weren't even cell phones yet, so it's just like
just cold calling people.
You have a van, and you have a van, you have a calling card, you have an atlas from Walmart, and you have amps and guitars and drums, and you're good to go.
How many times did this ever happen to you? Because I've talked to other artists, and they've had these horror stories where you show up to a venue, especially on those early tours, and the artist is like, or the promoter's like, who are you? Like, well, there's no show tonight. Or did you have any of those experiences?
We've had so many weird experiences. Or like, you get there, and because you don't know where you're going and there's no GPS, you're so late that you get there and you're so late that you have no idea, like you miss sound check and they don't think you're going to show up, and your fans are like, are they even coming? And then you get there at the last second. It's not like you can tweet like, hey, we're stuck on the road. I don't know if we ever got anywhere and people were like, who are you? But I wouldn't be surprised because there were definitely some of those shows at like record stores or whatever where you'd show up and you definitely felt like, you know, I remember a show we did in Nashville on our very first tour. I'm pretty sure it was like a Tower Records, and I swear we bummed out every single person that was like just there to buy records, and they were like, why do we have to listen to this in the middle of the store? Like, who are these guys? What are they doing here? and so it's a lot of tours can be, especially early tours, can be like their character building, as they say, because you're definitely humiliating yourself on a regular basis.
Sure. Well, so and you did another record pretty quickly after the first one, right? Emotion is Dead. That came out the next year.
Yeah. That's in. We went to the same guy, same studio. This time though, the budget went all the way up to $10,000. We were really spending big bucks then.
They almost doubled your budget from last time. Well, what was kind of the highlight for you, or the milestone for you from that Emotion is Dead record?
Emotion is Dead was interesting because I think making the record, we knew, and everybody sort of knew that was involved, that it felt like Understand This Is a Dream did resonate with people. And so because it felt like that, and we felt like people's ears were perked up and people were sort of paying attention to the band and maybe sort of knew who we were, we felt like we needed to one-up ourselves and do a much better version of what we did. And so we tried quickly to, expand our sound, whether that was, we added a bunch of programming and having drum machines and synths and adding, strings and lots of, female backing vocals, just like all kinds of whatever sound design kind of things we could do to sort of like up things. And we tried to just spread our wings more musically and try to make the heavier songs heavier, make the poppier stuff way poppier, make the more, you know, slightly progressive stuff more progressive, and to try to like break free from whatever like genre tags we had been called up to that point. And so it's just really just us trying to, again, just trying to do the best version of ourselves that we could be then, I think.
And I love, I mean, the album title in itself, like what a like, I mean, emo, I mean, was a kind of a thing, but I mean, to have a record title, Emotion is Dead, before it was really a scene. I mean, that's, you guys kind of paved that, were one of the earlier bands to kind of pave that way.
It's funny because we knew, so like when we started the band, it's like 97, and we're like, wow, man, there's these really cool bands, Sensefield and the Get Up Kids and Cap'n Jazz and the Promise Ring and Game Face, and we're like, this is like, everybody's calling this emo, and we're like, cool, that's like, we like this, we like emo. And very shortly after, it felt the same way that I said that it felt with Zao, where suddenly it went from, this is a fun new thing that's enjoyable and to make these types of songs and this type of vibe, to suddenly, very quickly, there's politics involved. You go to play a show, and every single night kids are coming up to you and they're saying, do you think this is emo? Is this band emo? Is this emo enough? And
weird.
So very quickly, and you're right, it's not mainstream yet. It's not broken through to be this buzzword that means whatever it means for the last, I don't know, X amount of years, but
sure.
You could already feel this sort of in crowd, out crowd, elitism sort of like vibe going around involving the scene, quote unquote. And very quickly it went from feeling really exciting to feeling limiting, to feeling like, oh, if you use this guitar sound in this way, or you sing in it in a certain way, or use a certain set of instruments a certain way, you're emo, you're not emo. And if you're not emo, then like whatever. And so very quickly I think we were just joking around one day and said it would be awesome to call an album Emo is Dead and like make the most like cliche emo like graphics and like have them dying on the cover. And which we ended up not doing that part, but like we were just cracking up laughing like, oh man, we have to call this Emo is Dead. And then very, very like a couple minutes later, we're like, it's Emotion is Dead. And as soon as I said that, or whoever, I'm not sure who said it. I feel like I said it, but honestly, I have no idea. And we were just like, oh my God, that's it. And we just kind of just started cracking up laughing. And yeah, we're just like, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's super interesting because that scene was super underground at the time, because bands like Sunny Day Real Estate and like American Football and like you said, Cap'n Jazz and all those bands, like it's what bothers, it doesn't, I mean, it irritates me to a point of where like the emo nights, and like I'll talk to friends of mine that are like a little bit younger, and they're like their emo was like 5 to 10 years later than like what I considered like the pioneering bands of emo. I don't know if you've had that, like they're like, it's My Chemical Romance and, you know, Fall Out Boy. And I'm like, well, not really. Those bands weren't even a thing yet, you know? So
I feel like you said it with like, to me, I mean, obviously everybody's going to say, you know, all the true old school people will say, you know, it's Rites of Spring or whatever. And I love Rites of Spring. I love Ian. I love like everything that has anything to do with bands, Embrace is my low key favorite Discord record by far. But like anything that comes from that,
that's awesome.
Yeah, that's like an amazing record. But like I think to me it all started with Sunny Day Real Estate, and that's like, I mean, I think the first record I think it was 94. And so I'm sure that they weren't calling it emo. And I'm sure that at that point, probably nobody was calling it that. But to me, that's like where that started. And so, you know, like how movements go. It's like, what's that? What, you know, you think of like the Malcolm Gladwell books, like Tipping Point and Outliers. It's like something starts out being this very niche, very underground thing that only like the true outliers are a part of or know about. And then suddenly it hits this tipping point moment. And then of course it did hit a tipping point moment with the bands you said, with, you know, with who are great bands like, you know, My Chemical Romance. And so it's like, it's something has to, obviously Jimmy Eat World, I would say kind of really in a way crossed over that bridge first with having like massive pop success on a major label. But like, yeah, it's always stuff bubbles around under the underground before most of us know what it is. And then suddenly it hits that moment where it becomes a thing, you know?
Right. Yeah. Cause Diary, Sunny Day Real Estate's Diary is like considered like the best emo record of all time. And it came out in like the mid-90s.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's crazy. Okay. Well, so you put out Emotion is Dead. And then the next record you guys signed to Epic. What was tell me about, you know, jumping to a major label.
Yeah. Jumping to a major was a wild experience because as Emotion is Dead was coming out, we could just feel something different. You know, when we would show up to play shows, there was just different energy. There would just be a lot more people that couldn't get in, that were standing outside because the shows were sold out, that were like singing along outside venues or waiting for us to come in, or we'd come back to a city in 2 months' time, and in 2 months' time we'd move to a venue that was double the size, and we were just like, this is weird. What is happening? And like, there's not YouTube at this point. It doesn't exist. There's not. This is pre MySpace, so it's not a lot of. You can't really necessarily read these things on social media, so we don't know until we're getting somewhere. There's like, sure, there's reviews or there's whatever, but there's not that quick, fast.
Right. It's not like instant
world that.
You're right.
Yes. So we didn't know. And so we're just suddenly, you're like showing up and shows are way better. And next thing we know, there's just like random people are coming up to us and they're like, hey, I'm so-and-so and I work at RCA. I'm so-and-so. I'm at DreamWorks Records and we want to sign your band. And it just kind of became that thing where I think it was like, you know, At the Drive-In signed to a major, and Jimmy Eat World had always been on a major, but it was like, it just started happening. And it was like kind of just, I guess that the timing for us was just suddenly, we just had like every major tried to sign us. And, you know, it was like A&R guys from labels riding in our van and like following us to like 6 shows in a row and just like, you know, wining and dining us, fly us to wherever to come see a concert at Madison Square Garden and, you know, take us somewhere fancy or whatever. It's just that story that I feel like everybody that signs to a major has it somehow, for some reason, for those like 2 months, you're like the thing that's like, it's like they all talk and it's like, oh, can't have that label have this artist because we want them. And so it just feels like suddenly it's just like a bidding war. And next thing you know, like, yeah, so that was it was a weird time. It was a difficult decision because we really didn't know who to choose. And it was just trying to like trust our gut and based off of people that we, you know, are talking to at labels or whatever. But just, yeah, that just was, I guess, the next step.
Yeah, I mean, and then the record did really well too for you guys.
That's funny because now it's weird because in hindsight now it's weird because now seems to be almost as many people appreciate it as did Emotion is Dead, but at the time it was like anything but that. Like when it came out, felt like, you know, it pissed a lot of people off. We changed our sound. We were whatever, not as poppy. We were way more aggressive, and people were bummed at the time. You know, there's some fans obviously who weren't, but it's just weird, like how that is a case of, or I think something as over time seems to have aged better to some people than not. But it was a weird time period.
Yeah. Did you kind of get that, like, oh, you sold out, like all that? Because I remember that being a big thing back, you know, in the early 90s, 2000s. It's like, oh, this band signed to a major label, like they're not cool anymore. Were you getting kind of like that vibe from people?
I feel like we never felt like we were cool ever, and we never really felt like we ever resonated with like a very like the cool kids per se. So that like was, I think, a little bit less of a thing to us, but there was definitely, you know, the talk of like selling out or whatever. But it's like, at the same time, sure, when the band started out, we were like, hey, you know, we love Texas is the Reason, and we love Spencefield and all these bands we were talking about. But what, you know, when we're kids, we started out like, when we first got into music, it was like us, like, you know, like standing in front of our mirrors pretending to play Motley Crue songs, or like, you know, listening to, like, my favorite record when I was super young was Harvest by Neil Young, or I think about like all the early Phil Collins and Genesis stuff and like things like that. It's just like we all grew up on songs that were on the radio, like pop rock, like rock music that was big, that were like singles. So to us, it was like, it was in no way was it sacrilegious to try to be on a major label and to try to whatever, because it's like, that's, in our mind, that's what bands did. So
sure. I mean, especially the greats. I mean, obviously you're on a label that had Michael Jackson on it, right? I mean, that's pretty crazy. It did feel really crazy at one point, just because, again, it's like we were from a really small town, and there hadn't been a lot of, you know, there hadn't been too much music that had necessarily broken out of Pittsburgh in that many years before us. And, you know, Rusted Root, of course, was a great example, and we had like Anti-Flag, but for the most part, it wasn't really like we were, you know, we weren't even from Pittsburgh. We were from like 40 minutes outside. And I do remember that, like, I remember when we signed to Epic, and we had this, you know, we had this bank account at this tiny little local bank that my mom would go in and do our banking. And I remember, like, when we signed and we got like an advance, really big check. And I remember being like, I've never seen a check this big in my life. And it's, you know, it goes into the band account. But I just remember like taking it in and being like, yo, this is really weird. Like, there's this giant check and it says Epic Records on it, and it's in my hometown little local bank. And exactly what you said, it's like, this is a label that like all these, like, you know, legends are on, and it definitely did feel surreal, but at the same time, like, everything was just like, we were on tour constantly, and everything was kind of moving so quickly that you almost didn't have time to breathe at that point, to barely even notice what was going on. Yeah. I was wondering if you, at what point do you like get home and you're like, you have a time to like breathe, and then like, were you kind of like, you know, a hometown hero, so to speak, like at that point? I mean, you're in a band that signed to a major label. Was there buzz around the town?
There is definitely buzz around the town, because I think mostly because every single person we were friends with almost were like guys that we had played in bands with that were in other bands, or were in our old bands, or we would play shows with. So it was sort of like our whole friend group, for the most part, was all musicians. So you felt that camaraderie, like anytime that somebody would do something cool musically, or something would happen for somebody. But yeah, it was a crazy time.
Well, the next record you guys put out, or the Deadbeat Sweetheart Beat, was that you guys left Epic at that point, right?
Yeah, that was Epic. You know, the situation with Epic went sour pretty quickly. And that was because we lost our A&R guy, got fired not long after we signed, and he was
I've heard
our
that
champion
story before.
Yeah. He was completely our champion at the label, and he had our back. And very shortly after that, basically the powers that be at the label, there were some people inside. There was a band at the label who I'm not going to throw under the bus, who basically convinced the label that we made the wrong record. And they basically, and so the label, before our record was out, way before it was out, decided that we made the wrong record and they weren't really going to promote it. And they decided that it was dead. They're like, so basically we're not going to do it. We're not going to give you music video budgets. We're not going to pay for all the promotional stuff. We're not going to push songs to radio. We're just kind of going to let it come out. And, which
so they almost like
really
shelved you guys right away, so to speak.
They borderline did. They let the record come out, but they waited 7 months after it was done. It had leaked online, and it had been leaked completely. It was online for like 5 months before it came out. And a week after it came out, president of the label called us up and said, your record's dead. And it's funny because, it was like they did nothing to promote it. It came out, sold like 17,000 copies the first week. And they're like, this record's dead. We're not going to do anything for it. We want to talk about, let's start talking about making the next record. And I think maybe, that sucks at any point in time, but I think older, wiser me now might have been like, all right, let's think, how do we make this work and look on the bright side and figure out how to change things up. But at that point in time, it felt like, hey, we're only like 23 years old. And we had basically, we just spent like a year making the record, and then we had to wait like 7 months for it to come out. And then it's like, that's a really long time when you're that young. And for them to say nothing's going to happen with this, we just felt like, well, how can we trust these guys going forward if they don't even care? So we were just like, let us out of our deal. And fortunately we had an option where we could get out. And so they let us go, and that ended up being, so at that point, to be honest, was like the very, that felt like the beginning of the end for the original like era of the band, because now I would probably try to approach that differently, because my main gig now for the most part is I'm a film composer, and I work in movies, and I see how much heartbreak and how much politics are involved in the movie industry, to where it's kind of like I think my skin is a good bit thicker now. But at that point, you're young and you don't really understand. And so you're thinking like, oh, our whole life, all we wanted to do was like be in a band and like have songs on the radio, and this is your chance. You're on a major label. And then it was suddenly like, oh, now they're damaged goods because they signed to a major label. They failed. And so that's literally like, it felt like that was the perception in the industry is, well, they had their chance. They signed to a major. It didn't work out. And now they're kind of like their time's over. And so it started to feel, whether it was that way completely, it's hard to say, but your perception a lot of times controls your reality, and that's how we felt. So we sort of, I think it was a fairly big blow, but of course we stayed a band for a few years after we made Deadbeat, which I don't think is our strongest record as far as songs is concerned at all, but it's by far and away the tightest the band had ever been. Like, we were, like, as far as how we played as a band and how tight we were live at that point, that was the pinnacle of that. And so on one hand, I think it showcases the band in a really strong way, and on one hand, but the other hand, I do feel like I was at that point burnt out and pretty felt fairly defeated.
Like defeated. Yeah, I was gonna ask, did you kind of feel defeated coming out of, like, you make it to the major label, and obviously that, you know, as a kid, that's probably the dream, and then they don't even give you a chance, really. You signed to Epic and they kind of just they put the record out, kind of, and then, like, didn't really do much for you. They didn't really give you a chance. I mean, that's kind of hard.
It was hard because I remember there's this thing that major labels do, and I'm not sure if it still really happens, but there was a thing they would do, which I know happens in movies, but they test a song to see how it reacts, and it's literally like they calling people up and playing them snippets of the song, and it's market research, and they say this song performed really well with this age group and this market and whatever, and we had 3 songs that tested extremely well at that point in time, where they were like, these tested as hits at 3 or 4 formats at radio. Now, of course, it's more than that. You can test as a hit and have a song not be a hit, of course, and you can have the opposite. These things happen all the time.
Right.
But the point was, we gave them a few songs that they had the metrics that would have said, you know, we had the fan base, we had the touring fan base, we had the sales history, we had songs that tested well, and they basically just said, like, yeah, these songs tested well. We're not going to do anything. We're not pushing them. We're not going to pay for anything. So you do feel like, wow, we worked so hard to try to get to this point, and that we don't get to, you know, really get the muscle behind this that you're supposed to have when you have a major behind you. So it did feel, yeah, I feel it feels pathetic for me now to talk about it and to look back and go, I let that, like, defeat us. And now I feel bad about that. But at that point in time, it just, I guess, just naturally what it was. So,
well, no, I mean, I wouldn't think that you should feel that way, because that's kind of what they, you know, you had all that attention and you're doing these, you know, like, they're kind of wine and dining you from different labels, and then you choose the one that you go for, you know, your gut tells you to pick, and then they're the one that screws you, right?
So, it's true.
So I mean, I totally understand where you come from, and I could feel that. I would imagine that's how you would feel if you get there and then they just kind of pull the rug out from under you, and then it's like, oh, is this really what we should be doing? I bet you there's a lot of questions that you had after that.
There is questions. It's like, because I always call that our Spinal Tap period, because, you know, Spinal Tap is hilarious. It's one of the, like, greatest movies of all time, but it's painfully realistic to me in the way that you have that's a movie that is a chronicle of a band that has hit their peak and is no longer at their peak anymore, and they're on their downward slope, and they're sort of a parody of themselves. And I wouldn't say that we were necessarily a parody of ourselves, but it definitely felt like that. Like, wow, our best days are definitely behind us, and it definitely felt like that, you know, at that point.
Was that kind of what led to, just after the record, that's when you guys kind of went on a hiatus? Was it?
Yeah, well, I think
after that.
Yeah, it was I remember there was the last song that was written. I wrote this song called The Final Song. And in my head, it was like the very last minute addition to Deadbeat. And in my mind, I said to myself, I was like, I'm writing this song, and it's called The Final Song because if things don't go well with this record, it will be the band's last song that we will have written, because we can't continually, like, you can't keep going and have the Spinal Tapness get worse constantly. Like, right. You can't have, like, you can't go and be like, every time you come to Phoenix, it's less people than the time you were before, because then it's like, yeah, well, why did you take a time away from college and your degree to come, like, be in the band, or whatever. It's like at some point you've got to say like, all right, the responsible thing to do is to say like, let's not beat a dead horse. And I started to feel like, I started to feel like we were beating a dead horse. And at the same time, simultaneously, I had basically hit my plateau of like distorted guitars and power chords and like aggressive, basically just like alternative rock music. I literally felt like I could, there was a few years there where I just couldn't listen to anything like that at all. And I couldn't really bring myself to like write those types of songs. And I was just like kind of, at that point I was really only listening to old country music. And I just kind of was, I didn't feel inspired at that point by rock music at all. And so when you don't feel inspired to make something and you don't really believe in it, and at the same time you feel like, are we kicking a dead horse? Is this thing run its course? And so it just kind of combined, and we did this tour in Europe, and it was our last tour, and it just felt, it's like the only tour that the band had done that just felt to me like sort of like it just felt dreadful. And I never had felt that way on the road. It would always have bum out moments, but it was always awesome. But it just felt like super depressing. And I was just like, I just feel like we just kind of knew that we had to like stop and
you could feel that
do it anymore.
That last tour. Yeah.
Yep.
And well, after you guys decided to split, is that when you started to pursue your solo records?
I did, but not immediately by any means. It took 3 years. Like for 3 years, I completely quit music. I didn't consider myself a musician. I moved to Los Angeles. I didn't tell people really that I played. Like if you got to know me, you would know, but I didn't. Like I made a bunch of new friends that I didn't tell that I was in a band for 10 years. And I basically like, I literally felt completely lost because I had started touring full time at pretty much the age of 19 and is the only career that I had known. But I felt like I failed, and I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, and I felt like I sucked, and like I shouldn't be trying to make music anymore. And so I just totally quit for like 3 years before finally, like, because it took a long time to get to that point where I felt like I should make a record. And so it wasn't like a quick, oh, hey, the band's breaking up, I'm going to like go do my own thing and go be a solo guy. It was not that at all. Yeah.
Oh, and then, what was there something that happened, or was there a reason that you decided to get back into it?
Well, I think like for me, I kind of always write songs. And even when I would tell myself I wasn't a songwriter and tell myself I'm a failure, I'm no good at this, I still had this little recorder, and I would like, anytime I get a little song idea, I would still record it into there, but I didn't know why. I didn't have any plans for it. And I didn't have any master plan of like, I'm going to do this with these songs. I didn't even know if they were songs. I just knew that like I would record an idea and then I would never listen to it again. Yeah. After about 3 years of that, I just, one day, I don't know why, I was like, oh, I'm going to listen to this. And I just like rewound it to the beginning, and I went back and I listened to everything. And at this point I was only listening to Townes Van Zandt, Guy Clark, Loretta Lynn, Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash, stuff like that. And all these songs felt in that lineage per se, like acoustic, folk, country related. But I was like, oh, I honestly think there's something here. I think there might be a record in here, or the start of a record in here. And for some reason, I don't know if I played it, some of it for my wife or what, and I just felt like encouraged enough that maybe I should try to make something out of it. And not really. I guess it was just like, it's just something that's in my heart, in my soul to, like I said, I might not be a great songwriter, but it just is what I do since I was in line to go to the bathroom in first grade.
I think people would beg to differ to say that you're not a great songwriter, but
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just felt like in a way I was like, it's the only thing I sort of know how to do. And like, I have to be honest with myself. And that was where I was at. And so it's like, I should try to make something of this. So that's sort of where that came from.
And when you put out that record, Bird in the Tangle, and did you tour on the album as a solo artist?
I did one full U.S. tour on that record, and then a couple years later, I did my second solo record, Too Free to Live, and I did a full U.S. tour on that too. So I did tour, but just not nearly as extensively as Juliana, nonstop. Mm-hmm. Never get off the road touring.
Yeah. And is that kind of around the time that you got into the film, composing for films? And how did that door open for you?
It happened at a pretty similar time. It was first movie I did was actually came out 9 years ago this weekend. 9 years ago, basically 9 years and 2 days ago it came out. Because I just saw one of those memory things. It's 9 years ago today, it was 9 years ago today, you were at the Roosevelt Hotel. And I was like, oh, I know why. Because we were celebrating because we did this movie and we thought it was going to bomb. And then it came and it was #1 at the box office, which was the weirdest thing ever. And so, yeah, that's another story of I didn't plan I didn't plan to become a film composer, and I had to basically be talked into it by my friend William Brent Bell, who's the director of many horror movies. And he was just like, I'm doing this low budget movie that no one's going to see, and there's no pressure. I want you to score it. And I kept telling him, no, I don't know how to do it. And basically he talked me into it. And that just kind of, we've just done about to do our 5th movie together that he just finished filming it a couple weeks ago. So somehow it just went from somebody convinced me to do it, and I just had to learn. I literally just had to watch a million tutorials and listen to every single interview with every composer. And obviously I've always been very aware of film scores, and I remember being super young and watching Superman as a kid, and then singing all the themes, singing the Clark and Lois romance theme, it would be in my head all the time or whatever. So it was always something I was aware of, but it felt like an absolutely untouchable universe that I could never in a million years ever get into. Mm-hmm. Because at that point in time, still super young, I think you almost had to be classically trained, but the rules have sort of changed to where you don't necessarily have to be classically trained now. But so yeah, that's just one of those things that just sort of, it fell into my lap, but at the same time I had to work insanely hard to not suck horribly at it.
Right. It wasn't they're like, do you want to do this film score? And you're like, sure, let me just do one take real quick. I'm sure you had quite a lot of work behind that one.
So it's so much work, and it's so much different than writing songs as a songwriter or writing songs as an artist, because it's just a totally different discipline. You're just trying to serve a story. You're trying to make,
you're not writing hooks and you're trying to do it and all that.
You're trying to make somebody else happy. You're trying to make a director happy. You're trying to push a story forward, as opposed to making a 3.5 minute, pop song or whatever it is. So
definitely. Well, okay. So now we're here, 14 years later, 15 years later, and you decide, and you're putting out music again with the Juliana Theory. What made you do, what made you guys jump back into it? And I love the new song better now. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I had basically for a few years, I'd been writing a big batch of songs that did not feel at all like my solo stuff. They weren't country enough. They weren't like, it just didn't have that vibe. And at first I didn't necessarily think that it could be, I didn't think it could be Juliana Theory stuff, but there was just, a few things that started to happen and things that people would say to me that started to make me think, hey, maybe this could become, become the seeds of new Juliana Theory music. Mm-hmm. And in the fourth quarter of 2019, we basically got offered to do an acoustic tour, which we'd never done before. We haven't toured, for real in many, many years. Right. But we got offered this acoustic tour, and basically it ended up being only Josh and I could do it. And we didn't really, I have to be honest, I didn't put much stock into the idea. And I was like, I don't really necessarily want to do this, because I thought maybe it would be sort of lame. Mm-hmm. But I had just finished a movie that was really, really it was a really rough one. And I was like, getting out and just being on the road might be really fun. And just it might be a nice change of pace. So Josh and I end up getting together to rehearse and changing all the songs, arranging them as acoustic songs, which to us meant not playing them the same way, but on acoustic guitar. It meant changing the keys, making a heavy song that's a guitar riff, turning that into finger picking, making a song that's, basically really changing the arrangement of everything to make it feel like an intimate kind of a totally different vibe. And we were like, hey, this feels pretty good. And so when we got out and started playing the shows, we just ended up really bonding and having a really great time. And, Josh and I go back to, like I said, to Guitar Lab or whatever, but right. I think we just got along better than we expected. And mostly every single night we would reconnect with people who had listened to our music. People would come up to us and be like, I met my girlfriend at your show, and now we're married and we have 2 kids, and our first daughter's name is Juliana, or crazy cool stories like that. And we'd be like, oh wow, there are people who still care. And every single night, biggest question we got without a doubt was, when are you going to put out new music? And so, I've been working on these songs and thinking maybe that's what they could become. And it just sort of felt like, okay, I think we could do this. And that's just kind of where it basically came from.
Wow. And then the first one you guys put out was Can't Go Home. Was that the first thing you did? And what was that? So you talked about, I remember you guys played here in San Diego on that tour. I'm in San Diego and you guys played the Casbah, right? I believe.
That was the weirdest show on the entire tour, I think. But yes.
Why was that? I'm curious now.
Okay, it was funny because we did that tour, we opened for the Spill Canvas, and they were full band, loud rock music. And 9 out of 10 shows, us playing acoustic was really audiences were, you could hear a pin drop. People would be singing along with us, but it was quiet. But every once in a while, I'd say honestly, 1 out of 8 shows, people were just drunk and were stoked for a rock show, and we're basically why are these dudes playing these soft acoustics? Why is this acoustic music happening at this rock show? And sometimes, and San Diego was the number one biggest epitome of that, to where it was so we could barely hear ourselves because everybody was just so rowdy. I get it. You're drunk, you're going to see a rock band play, you're stoked. And then if you don't know who we are, even if you do, and that's not what you're in the mood to see, it's a very different thing playing acoustic music in a rock venue or at
right. Yeah, because that's not
like,
a very that's not a very acoustic friendly spot.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think. I mean, I've been to a million shows there. Yeah.
So that was just one of those where it was like it's like we were playing like finger picking on a lot of stuff and it's really quiet, and so if the audience is too riled up, we literally can't hear ourselves, and that was one of those shows where we were like, oh man, like they're so noisy, and like we couldn't even like barely hear, but that was a funny one.
That's amazing. Well, where were you guys at when the world shut down? I mean, you put out Can't Go Home. You recently put out the new single. Like, how did that affect you?
I mean, it's been unprecedented, obviously.
Yeah.
For everybody, because the truth is we had a lot. We were going to do a lot of shows in 2020. We were going to do a bunch of Emotion Is Dead 20-year anniversary shows. We had announced.
Oh my God.
I think we had announced we announced New York and LA, and they sold out. So we did second nights in each one of those, and those were the only things we had announced. But we were deep in the booking of a bunch of other places, and so of course, like everybody else, we lost those tour dates went away, and I think it was just I knew that we started to make plans to record and to start recording new stuff as basically before Corona had really before it was a thing yet in the States, but then it kind of just became a thing.
Quickly became a thing.
As like plans are already made and we're starting to record stuff, and then it just kind of, just changed the way, that we did things, obviously. But, as far as like being extremely isolated in a studio with only a few people that never anybody else would ever come in and out. And, it's just like, it changes the vibe, which is like originally my goal for Can't Go Home originally was it has like a gang vocal chorus. And my goal was I wanted to get a bunch of my friends that sing in a bunch of different bands to all come in and sing that chorus. I wanted to have like 20 different singers. And then of
that
course,
would be cool.
I'm like, you can't get you can't bring everybody into the studio. So at one point I was like, I feel like, well, we could just like ask everybody to record it at their own places or whatever in the garage band. But that felt like that just takes away the whole spirit of that. So I was
the
just
camaraderie of being everyone together and singing it.
So I just faked it and basically did like 50 tracks of myself. Like I would try to sing it in different voices so I could sound like a bit. So I'm like singing a couple like really nasally and then singing a couple like really like deep sounding and like whatever, just to try to imitate that vibe. But like, that's the whole thing. It's like, that's what I feel like music right now is, to me, is needed more than ever, because everybody is so isolated and everybody's so separated from one another. And even when we do see each other, it's like we're usually seeing one another through masks, and you don't get smiles, and you don't get you don't get a lot of I guess what makes coming to a movie theater great is everybody gasping in unison at a scary scene, or everybody cheering at some like triumphant moment together, or a comedy, laughing together. And it's like concerts are that. It's like, I remember like going back to Sunny Day Real Estate. I remember they played in 2010, and I was like, oh, cool, Sunny Day Real Estate's going to play. And I was living in New York City at the time, and I got tickets to the show months and months in advance. And then when it came close to the time, I was like, I'm not in the mood to go to a show. I don't want to be around 3,000 people. I'm just not feeling the vibe. And I get there, and I'm like, still like, I'm not in the mood for this. And suddenly, like, In Circles starts playing. Next thing I know, I'm like in the middle of like absolutely everybody, like, you like pit. Like yelling and like with the whole crowd. And it's because that's undeniable. It's like, that's a cathartic kind of human thing. And so, yeah, I feel like it's just really something that I look forward to, some version of that coming back, hopefully sooner than later, knock on wood.
Yeah. And do you have like a full record ready, or what are you guys doing? Because I know you're putting the record, or you put out Better Now with Equal Vision, which is awesome.
Yeah, we did both of them. Both songs are Equal Vision.
Both songs are Equal Vision. Okay.
Yeah. We have. Let me just say that there's a bunch of things that are coming. That's what I can say right now.
Amazing! I can't wait.
This is the beginning of it, basically.
I love
what
that
we're doing.
I can't wait, dude. I'm so excited. I love Better Now. It reminds me of the earlier Juliana Theory stuff. I mean, the piano and just like it's a beautiful song. I love it, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brett, for taking so much time to chat with me. This has been so cool to hear the story of your band. I mean, like I said, hearing the closest thing when I was in high school, like, just sparked something, and it just changed my view, or not my view, but it really got me in that lane of all these bands that I hadn't, been exposed to. I thank you for that. And I thank you for chatting with me. I do have one more question for you. I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
I always had a joke for this one. And anytime somebody would be like, I'm like, go to college, get a real job. It's always my advice. No, my real advice is, if you feel so compelled that music is your lifeblood, then by all means follow that, but prepare for a non-traditional life. Prepare for not having, maybe not having health insurance all the time, and not knowing where your paycheck is going to come from, but knowing that you will have, if you let yourself, you'll have a rewarding life because you are creating and making things that you believe in and are coming from your heart and soul. And I think there can never be enough of that. So I think it's really like, when I'm truly sitting and talking to somebody that's younger and asking about that, I'm just telling them, hey, you have to realize that if you choose a career as an artist, there are multiple things you're going to sacrifice by doing that. But at the same time, there's other things that you're going to gain from that. And you just have to kind of know going in, hey, this is by no means is this always roses, and by no means is this always sold out venues and hit songs, and there's going to be way more lows than there are highs. But if you're prepared for that, then it can be extremely rewarding. You just have to you just have to give it your best and keep progressing and make what you believe in. And I think that's kind of the most important thing, is you have to do your best to shut out outside voices as much as possible, because if you try to do something that you think if you try to do something only to make somebody else happy, you're probably not going to make them or yourselves happy. But you have to kind of follow your inner gut. And if you believe in something and if you love something, chances are there's an audience out there for it. It might not be the biggest audience, but there's somebody out there, so just do what you believe in.